In the heart of West Africa, where red dust clings to the feet of barefoot children and the air hums with the rhythms of drums and distant radio static, a boy was born in the small town of Yako on December 21, 1949. His name was Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara, a name that, at first, few people outside his family thought much of. But names carry meaning, and his would come to shake empires. Upper Volta, the country he was born into, was not free. Not really. Though it bore the colors of a flag and had a seat at the United Nations, it was still shackled, economically, politically, and psychologically, to its former colonial master, France. Independence in name, dependence in practice. Thomas was the son of a gendarme, a man who had served the French army with distinction, yet returned to civilian life with little more than medals and disappointment. His mother was deeply Catholic and deeply principled. Together they raised their son in a household that prized discipline, faith, and education. It was a hard life, but also a thoughtful one. Young Thomas was not like the other boys. He was introspective, quiet but confident, and endlessly curious. While other children played, he read. While others accepted life as it was, he asked why it couldn't be different. His favorite subjects were history, philosophy, and politics, ideas that in those days were dangerous to ask too many questions about. At just 17, he made a decision that surprised even his closest friends. He joined the military. It wasn't for glory or out of blind patriotism. Sankara saw the military as a means to something greater. In a society where only a privileged few could afford university, the army was one of the few paths to education, to influence, and, ultimately, to power. But from day one, he never wanted power for himself. He wanted it for the people. While training in Madagascar, he witnessed student protests and social uprisings. He saw firsthand how young people could challenge unjust systems. He studied revolution, not just in theory, but in practice. Marx, Lenin, Mao, Nkrumah, Fanon. These were not just names in books to him. They were blueprints, inspirations. When he returned to Upper Volta in the 1970s, he was a changed man. Still a soldier, but now, unmistakably, a revolutionary in waiting. He rose quickly through the ranks. His speeches began to draw crowds. He spoke not in the dry, bureaucratic tone of most officials, but with fire, humor, and conviction. He used parables. He quoted jazz musicians, poets, and African prophets. He mocked corruption. He questioned authority, even when that authority was supposed to be on his side. By 1981, he became Secretary of State for Information. 2 years later, he was appointed Prime Minister. But that didn't last long. The French embassy grew nervous about this bold young officer who refused to follow protocol and called for true independence. They pushed to have him fired, and they succeeded. But that only made him more popular. Young people idolized him. Workers rallied behind him. He dressed like them, spoke like them, lived among them. In a continent full of leaders who copied the colonial elite, living in palaces, traveling in motorcades, wearing designer suits, Sankara was something radically different. On August 4, 1983, a group of junior officers, led by his lifelong friend Blaise Compaoré, staged a coup and freed Sankara from house arrest. The revolution had begun. The first act of his presidency was poetic and powerful. He renamed the country. Upper Volta, named after a river by foreign geographers, was no more. In its place, Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. A name that spoke of dignity, pride, and moral strength. Sankara didn't stop there. He banned luxury government perks, sold off the official Mercedes fleet, told ministers to ride bicycles. He gave up the presidential mansion, cut his own salary, refused air conditioning in his office, wore the same red and green fatigues every day, designed by Burkinabe tailors with local cotton. Even his guitar, which he played in a band, was homemade. Symbolism mattered, but so did substance. He launched a campaign of self-sufficiency. Sankara believed that no one could liberate a people but the people themselves. Burkina Faso, he said, would no longer beg for foreign aid or live on loans it could never repay. He mobilized millions of citizens, men, women, and children, to dig wells, build roads, plant trees, and construct schools. In just a few years, over 350 schools were built. 2 million children were vaccinated. Literacy rates soared. Deforestation slowed. Public health exploded forward. And then there was his land reform. Burkina Faso was a feudal society. Vast swaths of land were held by powerful traditional chiefs and landlords, while ordinary farmers worked as near serfs. Sankara redistributed that land directly to the peasants. The result? Food production increased dramatically. Burkina Faso, once a nation of imported grain, began feeding itself. But perhaps his most daring reforms were in the realm of women's liberation. He was one of the only male African leaders to place women's rights at the center of his revolution. He said, "A soldier without political education is a potential criminal. A revolution without women is no revolution at all." He criminalized female genital mutilation, outlawed forced marriages, encouraged women to join the military and police forces. He demanded equal pay for equal work and scolded men for treating their wives as domestic slaves. On Women's Day, he insisted that men cook, clean, and care for children to understand the double burden women carry every day. This was not just talk. It was real, radical policy, and it scared many. In the West, Sankara was becoming a problem. He refused World Bank loans, rejected IMF structural adjustment programs, nationalized land and resources, kicked out corrupt contractors, and, most dangerously, he inspired others. From Ghana to Mozambique, from South Africa to the Caribbean, his speeches circulated like wildfire. Here was an African leader who walked the talk, who dared to dream, who refused to bow. But power is a jealous thing. The enemies he made, foreign and domestic, were watching. Sankara's fierce independence isolated Burkina Faso diplomatically. France and its allies viewed him as too radical. His refusal to repay colonial-era debts angered global financial institutions. Even within his own government, voices of dissent grew louder. They said he was moving too fast, that he was too idealistic, that he wouldn't compromise. And they were right, he wouldn't. But it cost him everything. On the afternoon of October 15, 1987, Sankara arrived at a staff meeting. He wore no body armor. He had refused increased security. He believed in living among the people, not behind walls. That afternoon, gunmen, led by Blaise Compaoré, his old friend and comrade, stormed the compound. In less than 30 minutes, Sankara and 12 aides were dead. He was only 37 years old. The revolution, it seemed, had ended. Compaoré took power that same night. He reversed Sankara's policies, reopened Burkina Faso to foreign interests, and ruled for the next 27 years with an iron grip. Mentioning Sankara's name in public became risky. His grave, hastily dug, remained unmarked for decades. But truth has a way of surfacing. Across Africa, and even across the world, Sankara's legacy refused to die. Young activists wore his face on T-shirts. His speeches were quoted in protests. His name became a whisper of defiance, a memory of how things could be. In 2014, the people of Burkina Faso finally rose again, driven by a new generation that had grown up on Sankara's forgotten words. They overthrew Compaoré and demanded justice. Years later, a trial was held. Witnesses testified. Records were uncovered, and in 2021, Blaise Compaoré was sentenced to life in prison for the assassination of Thomas Sankara. It took more than 3 decades, but history caught up. And through it all, the legend of Thomas Sankara only grew. Today, he stands not just as a leader, but as a symbol of what Africa could be: free, self-reliant, just. A symbol of what leadership could look like: humble, bold, fearless. A symbol of revolution, not the kind that burns down buildings, but the kind that plants trees, teaches children, and lifts the poor out of silence. Sankara once said, While revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas. And he was right. His body was buried, but his dream lives, not in textbooks or speeches, but in the hands of every African farmer who owns his land, in the minds of every young woman who knows her worth, and in the hearts of those who still dare to imagine a better world. Thomas Sankara, the man who gave Burkina Faso its name, and gave Africa a glimpse of its future.